My name is Josh Rogan. I'm a columnist with Washington Post. It's my honor to be here at the unveiling of the Global Tech Security Commission report. Before we start, I'd just like to give a quick shout out to the man who made all this possible, Keith. We all know Keith from different parts of our lives and career. I met him as a reporter covering his mission to establish clean networks around the world at the State Department. And as you know, Keith doesn't tackle problems, he declares war on them. And he traveled the world declaring war on this issue and made a huge difference. And then I started to realize over time that actually what he was building was a clean network filter of his own. And you've all passed that filter, because if you're not trusted by Keith, you're out of the network. And so the fact that we're all here today means that we all sort of share in this mission to figure out how to solve this question of technology and national security. And this event is part of the broader effort to define a central question of our era. How can the free world harness technology to protect not only the economies, but the very freedoms that underpin them? And this initiative is just the first in what will be a series of battles over how to solve this crucial problem. We have a difference here between free societies and authoritarian societies. In free societies, we base our interactions on trust, rooted in values like respect for free trade, the rule of law, and human rights. That's the backbone of our systems and the backbone of our alliances. Free countries thrive on that, but authoritarian regimes do not. They're transactional. They don't have trust, they just have transactions. And those transactions often come at the risks to our freedom. This panel and the work of the Commission is about ensuring that technology remains a force for freedom. The stakes are clear. If we fail to secure this technology, we fail to secure freedom itself. This Commission has done a lot of work. I encourage you to read the report. It focuses on 5 areas: education and training, global trust and tech standards, securing supply chains, corporate governance, and coalition building. And we're very fortunate to have an expert panel to start this discussion here today. Let me start with you, Mr. Ambassador. They often call your country Estonia for a reason. How is it that Estonia has turned a digital-first mindset into a model for resilience and innovation? What have you learned through this experience that you can impart to this fine audience here? And thank you so much.
Thank you, Josh. And I'd love to really thank all the organizers, but certainly Keith for this event, for loaning your name to this whole pursuit of using the digital or the technology to the benefit of freedom and liberty. Now, the story of Estonia deserves another conference, and I won't waste too much of your time. But it's simply clear that when the Soviet Union fell apart more than 30 years ago, and Estonia was one of the nations that was able to restore its independence from the ashes of Soviet occupation, we had the huge challenge how to catch up with the rest of the world. And we decided to be really bold and embrace all things digital. But very importantly, and in the context of this particular conference, we never lost track of the ultimate objective. After all, using technology and being bold with technology is not about being bold with technology. But it's not even about creating more wealth. But after all, it's about making sure that our people can live in a free society, can pursue their own dreams. And for that, we need to have trust in the technologies that we use, in the applications that we use, and in the government and private sector services that are behind these technological applications. So in Estonia, we actually have really had the trust in mind at all times, and it works for us. We've actually spread this experience also elsewhere in the world, and if anyone's interested, I'd be happy to share it with you.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Thank you. Marcus, let me go to you next. Google's at the forefront of digital infrastructure, everything from cables to cloud. Take us one level deeper into that level of trust and security. What are the biggest challenges of securing our digital infrastructure, especially on an international scale? What are the opportunities? What should the people in this room think about doing first when it comes to that important task?
Josh, thank you, and also want to add my thanks to Keith and the team at the Institute for their leadership in the space. Keith, both in government and now in the private sector again. Would love to start by expressing Google's proud service and commitment to our national security interests. We support the U.S. government, the U.S. military, and security personnel globally by first being committed to support our side of the fence. 15 years ago, as a result of an attempt by the Chinese government to hack our systems and attack our users, we made a principled decision to leave that market. And so today, unlike some other US-based companies, we have no infrastructure in China. We do no research on artificial intelligence or emerging technologies in that country. And I wanted to make that point because I do think that that is a fundamental commitment that is important to our future success. Google, as you know, is a global company. We operate in markets around the world. Today, we find ourselves as a cloud provider with, Josh, as you said, a robust global network that we view as a national asset. That national asset allows us to not only serve the public sector and our allies around the world, but it also allows us to serve commercial interests around the world. And to borrow a phrase, we're going to stay ahead. We'll maintain our lead in key technologies by continuing to invest and innovate. And it really is critical that American entrepreneurs have the space to compete globally, and that we avoid a situation where we, in an attempt to protect our technology, we strangle innovation. So critically important to do. The point that you made about the point that has been made both by Keith and you about partnership and allies around the world is also critical. Finding ways for the West to protect infrastructure and to prioritize cybersecurity in an age when we certainly see AI in particular potentially being used to attack our systems, making sure that the West doesn't over-regulate that technology before it matures both as a tool to protect our systems, but also as a foundational tool for ensuring that we maintain our economic prosperity and national security.
Interesting. A lot to unpack there. You mentioned that your company avoids direct business inside of China, unlike some others. Are there some particular companies you'd like to call out from the stage right now as being less scrupulous?
Well, look, I think it is.
You brought it up.
I did, and I'm happy to talk through American cloud companies who have infrastructure in China.
Interesting.
I think the issue, though, Josh, is not only the choice that those companies have made, but also choices that the U.S. government can make around using technologies that are both being employed by the PRC and our own DoD.
Interesting. And just before I move on, since you brought it up,
Sure.
On AI, do you think there is a role for regulation right now? And do you think that the open model that's being pursued by some tech companies should be looked at as perhaps being used by some of our adversary nations to build their military systems upon?
There is a role for regulation. There is a role, and I think the approach that I would recommend to in the United States is the very opposite of what our partners in Europe are currently pursuing. The role should be risk-based and leveraging our history of regulation in this country, really focused on a sectoral approach. That is not the case in some other parts of the world. Remind me of your second question.
I was just asking you if the open or closed model for AI development presents different vulnerabilities when an open model could be used by bad actors to do bad things.
Well, I think there's a role for both. And we are seeing that that Chinese interests are building use cases and models based on open source U.S. models. And so that's something that the U.S. government should look at. But certainly there is a role for open source models, and one at the lead edge of technology development for proprietary models as well.
Interesting. Thank you. We'll come back to that. Zach, let me ask you about another way that Americans and people in free and open societies may end up aiding our adversaries in tech, and that's through investment. You worked in the Commerce Department. You had a front row seat to these types of things. How do we think about trusted investment as a cornerstone of our tech strategy? How can we ensure capital flows are strengthening the free world's innovation and not empowering authoritarian regimes' innovation, which is to be used against us?
Yeah, Josh, thank you for that question. And just to piggyback off of what Mark had said about Google, I work at Wiley Ryan. It's a law firm in Washington, D.C. As a matter of policy at the law firm, we do not represent companies in foreign countries of concern. So when the Krach Institute, when the Global Tech Security Commission is talking about clean businesses, clean networks, clean corporations, all of that, I mean, we're walking the walk and talking the talk. And news alert, one can make substantial revenue not representing entities in foreign countries of concern. So that's not the only alternative. And also, I would encourage everybody to recall 20, 25 years ago, before China's growth and dominance on the world stage, we were fine. People were making money. The stock, there were stocks, etc. So people tend to think that this is, if we disentangle capital flows, etc., the sky is going to fall. The sky isn't going to fall, just like the way it wasn't falling 20 years ago. With respect to capital flows, I want to underscore that we are not doing enough. Let me repeat that. We are not doing enough. The executive branch isn't, the Congress isn't, businesses aren't, et cetera, right? We are never going to be able to turn this tide around unless we get serious about this. China is the second largest GDP in the world, and the country has one of the lowest per capita GNI in the world, which means what? The workers aren't getting the money. When we invest, the workers aren't getting the money. The companies aren't getting the money. The money is going straight into the Chinese Communist Party's pockets. And we are investing in China. This is a conservative figure based on publicly available data, upwards of $2 to $3 trillion that is being invested in China. And again, it is going largely into the CCP's pockets, right? When companies are looking at return on investments, it's going to go dark. China is going to go dark. You put your money in, you may get a great, healthy return that gets companies and individuals addicted to it, but it will go dark because that is China's strategy, to reap the benefits of what we give it, the Western world gives it, and then go dark and then attack us. And I want to leave with one thing, because this is a real huge problem. If we are investing in a foreign country of concern, like China, who is also, remember just a couple of days ago, the export controls that they imposed, basically saying they're not going to provide antimony and graphite, et cetera, to the United States. They're not doing that on fentanyl, on illicit fentanyl. Do we want to support a country and industries in a country where the government is supporting and facilitating and encouraging through awards activities that are destroying Americans, right? Is that where we want to invest? And do we think that our investments are benign? Or do we really think when we're dealing with a country like that they're going to weaponize our investments against us, just like they're weaponizing lots of other things against us?
Understood. Before I move on, let me ask you a very quick follow-up question. You said that we're not doing enough. I think that's, we can all agree that there's a lot more to be done, but exactly what's to be done is a matter of some debate. And, we have a sectoral-based export restriction regime put in by this administration. It's not perfect, but it's there. We have a lot of discussion about outbound investment restrictions in Congress, some promises of legislation, but we haven't actually seen that happen. But now we have a new administration, and what do you expect? What can you tell the people in this room to expect, if you know, or if you can predict, from that new administration? Will they keep up the technology export regime that the Biden administration started? Will they advance outbound investment restrictions, even though it might rub some people on Wall Street the wrong way? Read the tea leaves for us. And we won't tell anybody. It's just for us.
I really love that question for this reason, that just because we've done things a certain way, export controls, outbound investment restrictions, does not mean that that is the model to follow in the future. We read every single day all of these gaps in our rules with respect to export controls. When you look at the outbound investment regulations, and I looked at it and I was like, scratching my head going, why did you bother? This doesn't even do anything. So it's a lot of smoke and mirrors pretending like we're doing stuff and we're not doing stuff. Let me tell you, our semiconductor export controls, our outbound investment restrictions, our CMIC lists, they haven't made a dent in anything, right? So we're talk and really no action. How would you, now going to the question, how would you re-envision this? I don't know what the Trump 2.0 is going to do, but what we can do is influence behavior by talking about it, right? So going to this issue of, well, how can we do it better? Think about compliance. When companies have EPA compliance issues, right, FDA compliance, they complain a little bit, but they ultimately do it. Why can't we bring that kind of thinking into capital flow restrictions, export control restrictions? The government would tell companies, you have by 2032 to restrict data flows, capital flows, tech transfer to China. By 2027, you got to reduce exposure by 25%, by 2030, 50%, let's say by 2032, 100%. Companies, you figure out how you're going to do it, but you're going to do it, right? And it makes enforcement easier. These are ways that we really need to accelerate what we're doing, be serious about what we're doing in a results-oriented way.
Interesting. Thank you. David, let me go to you, because Palantir has been, I would say, in my opinion, more proactive about asserting American values as part of its ethos than some other tech companies. Your CEO often talks about the battle between free and open societies and authoritarian regimes. So let me ask you the broader question, which is, how do we as a government and as a community and as a society really ensure that our values, our system prevails? Because frankly, there are a lot of people out there, including in the business community, who don't think that's necessarily going to be the case, and who think that maybe China and Russia are actually, slowly but surely taking the upper hand on a lot of these issues.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, Josh, and it's good to be on stage with you again. Thanks to Keith and Michelle in particular for allowing me to work on the commission. I think it's pretty clear where our CEO is on American values, on Western values versus authoritarianism. That's why it's been fun to be at Palantir for the last 2.5 years. Prior to that, it was 28 years in the federal government, 10 in uniform. What I can tell you is what we need to do is continue integrating data-driven technologies across all elements of national power faster, more pervasively. The core principles that the Commission's report have laid out indicate, I think number one was education. Senior leaders, including Thomas Kurian, who when I was the DoD CDO visited me twice, very quickly gave me his personal number, said, if you need anything, call me, right? I mean, making that commitment early on in my tenure and really putting his foot down on where Google stood on support to the national government. I think what people like Thomas, like people like Alex have taught those of us that were in government and now on the outside we're taking a part of, is that the way you get better at understanding the technology is by being a person that's in the process of integrating it. The more that you integrate a data-driven technology and AI workflow into your current business process to change what you're going to do is going to unlock the creative nature of the human to say, if it can do that, can it do this? And then you start to follow that up the value chain and you start to ensemble some of those wins. And upon that, the transformation starts occurring, not just in operating more efficiently as a government, not operating with more precision as an element of national power, but also as the human that's central to that in understanding the opportunity of it, the things that are impediments to progress, and the policies that don't exist, that need to, or that get in the way. So I think right off the bat, it's increase the investment, empower the workforce to go faster, and just accelerate the campaign of learning. And as we do that with our partners and allies, we can start to come together at events like this, where we can start to compare where we've found challenges, where we found gaps in capability, and also where we found accelerants that we can bound from. To go to Michelle's point, let's stay on offense. It's silly to play defense consistently. When I was with the SOCOM commander, as an example, we visited the president of MIT. It was the first time a 4-star general had visited MIT, he said, in 20 years. As we were having a conversation with him, it was interesting as he started discussing the competition with China. And in his perspective, he said, you cannot slow China down. His words, you can damn sure speed us up. And I think collectively with that campaign of learning, with just integrating the data-driven technologies with partners who share those same values, that we'll be able to not only keep at pace, but accelerate past them.
Do you think we can do both, slow China down and speed up?
I think some of the regulations are intended to slow them down. I don't think, as my colleague agrees, that we've done enough to actually enforce them. Plenty of conversations around individuals that are still selling to China. Some very, successful business leaders. And I think from their perspective, they're just following the government's policy. So until the government's policy actually dictates the line, then they're going to continue doing what capitalists do, which is generating revenue until they reach that point that they've been bitten and decide they need to burn it all down and start over and make a new capital investment to save their business.
Interesting. Yeah.
Just add to that point, I think it's
Sure.
really worth underscoring this last point. The less we invest in China, we're not making adequate productive investments in the United States and in the nations of our allies. And the less we invest in China, that allows us to do more here, which collectively with economies of scale, et cetera, will drive down costs, but will allow us to both slow them down by not investing there and accelerate what we're doing.
Right, and Marcus, you want to make a point, but let me just respond to that quickly, because it seems to me what both of you are saying is that corporations, even American corporations, American corporations that care, will do what they're incentivized to do. And so let me ask you, Marcus, what incentives would steer corporate America, and especially the tech innovators, towards doing what the people in this room consider to be the right thing and away from what people in this room consider to be the wrong thing?
Really good question and great comments. I think the idea that Zach raised about investing in the United States is really critical. Here's a basic, we're all capitalists, we believe in free enterprise. I actually believe that that great American companies should be allowed to make decisions about where they invest. The US government should also use its power and its most basic power in deciding what technology it chooses to use is a huge tool that I think the US government underutilizes. And so I could imagine an American company making a choice to deliver technology to an adversary, and the US government making a decision not to empower that delivery by purchasing that technology into our system. I think that's a basic level of disruption that the U.S. government could create without disrupting our markets or our approach to capitalism. And we do that. Imagine a situation where the U.S. government would purchase a tank that is also being used by an adversary. You couldn't. It's unimaginable. I think we should apply that same logic to technology, and we haven't yet.
Interesting. So what would the example be? Cyber tools, spyware?
Cloud computing networks.
Got it.
If our adversaries are using them, if they're being developed by engineers in China, it's probably not a good idea.
Interesting. Mr. Ambassador, let me go back to you, because one of the big themes of the Krach Institute's work, but also of this event today, is how do we work with our allies, especially our allies in Europe. As Marcus mentioned earlier, Europe has a different approach to this regulation. European countries have a different approach to government involvement in some of these innovative industries. But somehow Estonia has managed to navigate that. So I was wondering if you could sort of talk about how do we reconcile the European approach to regulating tech innovation with the American approach, and what challenges does that present, and what opportunities does that present?
Right. So Europe may seem like one place from the other side of the ocean, but it actually consists of many countries, many nations, and and really different approaches. Estonia happens to be one of those countries that is certainly always on the side of freer markets, less regulation, and more trust in free people doing the right things. So when it comes to regulation in tech, regulation in businesses, you can always trust that we are closer to the approaches of Americans. I also think that actually the next 4 years will present a great opportunity for the U.S. and Europe to be even more aligned than they've been in the past 10-15 years on key technology and trade issues. And in fact, I would argue that there has been a lot of alignment going on even since, let's say, 2020 and certainly 2016. There is more sober mind and more kind of understanding of what's at stake when it comes to authoritarian regimes using the technology in their way. Now, kind of connecting to the previous questions, I'm also personally a great fan of free markets doing their job and people acting accordingly. But I believe that quite often the problem is that when it comes to particularly publicly traded companies, they are forced to take decisions that bring short-term benefits, but may also bring longer-term risks. And whereas the markets should work and do its job, we may think of ways how to help the markets to work, so to say. Because I would argue that, particularly in Europe, there are many cases where publicly traded, well-known companies have made a huge bet on China, particularly on hoping to get a considerable market share in China. And after 10-15 years, they've been forced to admit that they made a huge mistake. So what if, in the context of, for example, publicly traded companies and major strategic decisions or major strategic pivots, let's put it that way, we introduced a rule or requirement that the management of the company, before submitting this proposal, they have to present the shareholders with the with the independent analysis of the impact of this particular decision in 10 or 15 years time. And maybe if it turns out that the risks actually are bigger than the potential benefits in 2 to 3 year time, then the markets will start to do what they are designed to do. Maybe just throw in that kind of idea.
Interesting. David or Marcus, do you think that would work? Is that?
Yeah, I think what Marcus said made a lot of sense, and it's not surprising that if we think selling something to China is a strategic mistake, then make sure that the U.S. government matches the investment on this side of the ocean and buys the complementary or equivalent of what that company was going to sell. You asked what that could be. Again, I think Marcus was spot on with, almost we need a national AI infrastructure act similar to the Federal Highway Act, where we double down on compute, where we double down on transport, where we double down on energy, where we double down on all of the components that you would bubble wrap around models to ensure there's performant when you put them in play as they were when a scientist or an engineer developed them before hitting the wild. I think we have to think about how we make that capital investment as a nation if we truly believe that AI is the technology of our time that will transform the world. Again, I think if you look at where we have begun inside the U.S., setting a great example, leveraging this type of technology, I'm not sure that we've fully embraced the need to double, triple, quadruple our investment on any of those areas that allow us to both make sure our departments and agencies have what they need to leverage this game-changing technology broadly, to ensemble those elements of national power effectively, and then to take those lessons learned and share them with our allies and partners and see if they want to be a part of that movement.
Interesting.
I want to bring a perspective just based on the overall sort of capital markets, right? It will make sense in certain instances where if you don't get to sell to China, the government will buy from you, and that's a fair point. But when you're thinking about investments in markets as a whole, unless there's government regulations, there will be companies who will reap tons of profits in the short term from selling in China. And that's where the capital markets are going to go and are going to invest, right? And so we really do incentives are always helpful, but preventing this race to the bottom, whereas if one company makes lots of profit, then another company is going to go and another company's going to, we do need government regulation. I would never embrace this notion, and not that anybody's suggesting it, but as an alternative, I would never embrace the notion that the government doesn't have a key role to play in national security. It absolutely does, and we really need to do more to prevent the race to the bottom that we're currently on, where one company is flocking to China because another company is, and that's what's gotten us to the very edge, to the very brink that we are today.
Before we move on, do you have an idea of how that would be set up? We're talking about setting up an AI infrastructure, AI regulation, AI legislation. But you've worked in government recently. Where do you envision this actually happening, and how do you think it should be organized in a way that could actually happen in the next, given amount of time, and with the least amount of friction, the highest chance of success?
I mean, I'll say, so when you deal with capital flows, you've got to deal with treasury. And then when you have good software technology and data, because data moves through software, then you've got the export control jurisdiction. You've got sanctions jurisdiction, export control jurisdiction. That's all you need. And I'm really a fan of rethinking our regulations like the EPA does it. Companies, you don't have to do it right this second, because we know that you have to re-engineer supply chains and figure out where else you're going to invest and all that. But we're going to give you a lead time and a transition time, a little bit every year, but make sure that by 2032 or whatever year the government picks, the companies are going to be out, right? Goods, software, technology, data, capital flows. We have to do this with respect to China. The problems with China are too high. If one proposed something like this for Iran, I don't think anybody in the United States would be like, oh, that's pretty irrational, right? Well, why is it irrational with respect to China? It is a larger military, it is a larger threat, and doing what much worse than what Iran is doing, I would say, by poisoning and killing Americans through drugs and fentanyl. This is outrageous.
Yeah, I mean, you answered the question why, because China has the biggest market in the world and soon the biggest economy in the world, and that's an irresistible draw. But no, that's neither here nor there. David, you want
just at the same time, completely agree. Regulating the markets, making that very clear, reduce the gray space. It's black and white. That hasn't necessarily happened yet. I think, we're looking forward to a potential opportunity for that. But I do think we need to be careful not to over-regulate the technology itself, because it's a slippery slope to begin to tell your engineers you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to try that. And, part of America's advantage is the creative nature of our engineers and the application of this technology. Some of the regulations I've been seeing come out start to constrain that in a way that I think is a little troubling, because we need to make sure that we understand we're just starting this journey with this technology, and if we over-regulate the technology itself, not the markets or somebody's ability to sell it, then we're actually going to limit ourselves, and I'll say our competitors don't have those same constraints.
Thank you.
More.
Go ahead.
And that is, if we right now our regulations are trying to do this one size fits all, because China is such a problem, but somehow we don't want to call out China as a problem. We just try to do these expansive regulations that apply to everybody when really the target is China. If we are serious about what the threats are and honest about them, regulating China allows us to deregulate substantially with respect to our allies, with respect to technology, et cetera. So let's focus on where the problem is and not focus on other areas where we should actually be collaborating rather than pulling back.
Mr. Ambassador, you were next.
Absolutely do agree with this last comments and the approach whereby we should focus on the national resilience and figure out where are the key vulnerabilities, and make sure that among allies we will not have vulnerabilities where we actually rely on single source from countries like China and some others like Iran, and Iran is more sanctioned anyway. But that kind of approach is the one that is flexible enough and focused on the key areas where we have need for resilience and where we might have vulnerabilities. I'm completely fine if all the rubber ducks in the world are produced in China. However, I'm not fine if the technologies that our military relies on or key functions of our society rely on only have producers and developers in this country.
As the father of a 2-year-old who has a large collection of rubber ducks, I have to agree with you on that final point. But that's neither here nor there. Before we move on, Mr. Ambassador, let me ask you a question about resilience, because Estonia has been on the front lines of the effort to help Ukraine. And that there's a war that's going on right now that's fought in the digital realm as fiercely as anywhere else. Are there lessons learned from the last 3 years of war in Ukraine about digital resilience and what the vulnerabilities are? And could you tell us what those lessons are?
Yeah, that's another longer story.
Sure.
We had another 2-hour
You've got 1 minute.
Seminar at our embassy just 2 weeks ago on that very topic. But I believe that the cyber conflict and cyber resilience is one of these stories that is underappreciated and underreported from this war. I think one of the key lessons has been how well the public-private partnership has actually worked, and how heroic role some of these companies on this very stage have played in helping the nation of Ukraine to survive. I believe that Estonia also has a big contribution in helping Ukraine. We've been working with them for years and years, well before the massive aggression, and actually their main public e-government system is actually based on Estonian design, which is diffused, which is secure, and which is supposed to serve people in Ukraine and outside, which has made, for example, this massive army of Ukrainian refugees to still stay in contact with Ukraine, even while being a refugee in Estonia or Germany, Poland, or any other country.
Excellent. Well, I think we should have another panel just on that subject at some point. Just as a parting word, let me ask you, Marcus, for the closing words here. Anything you want to respond to, but also on this question of de-risking from China, separating our supply chains from China. Google may not be heavily invested in China, but I'm sure your supply chains still run through China. Is that realistic? Does the 2032 or 2027 timeline that Nazak has laid out, does that sound reasonable to you? Does that sound doable? And how do you think about supply chains in the context of a U.S.-China relationship that is only getting more risky as time goes on?
Yeah, would love to start with the supply chain. I think you, your son, your daughter have it right. De-risking is the approach that we ought to be thinking about. Rubber duckies, okay. Running networks.
She'll be relieved to hear that.
It's important. Relying on cyber tools or AI developed in China, not okay for the DoD to integrate into our national security infrastructure. So big deal there. Huge opportunity for the U.S. to invest both using federal procurement and deregulation of our national grid to enable increased innovation in AI in the United States. So the federal government has the tools to enable us to move faster, and would love to see that happen.
Well, I think what we've gotten here today is a broad set of ideas to work from, and I think if you'll delve into the Commission's report, what you'll find is a blueprint for how to get from here to there. So let's let this be the beginning of the discussion. I hope what you'll all take these conversations back to your companies and organizations to continue them, and then just remember what happens at the Krach Institute does not stay at the Krach Institute. And let's give our panelists a big round of applause, and thank you so much.